Astronomy 151 students. This is Mr. Stockbridge. I'm here on Tri-County Community College's campus in the chemistry lab, also doubling as the astronomy lab. The college owns several telescopes. We're going to take a quick video tour of them, looking at the different types and the different parts. These are very, very good representations of the types of telescopes that are available and easily affordable for amateur astronomers like you and me. So we're going to take a quick look and see what the college has. Alright, this is a great example of a refracting telescope. Remember from the lecture that refracting telescopes were the first types of telescopes invented. Now we're just going to take this complicated looking telescope and look at it one piece at a time. Let's start with the lens. The general tube of the telescope is long and skinny. If we look down here, you can see that we're able to see simply straight through the tube. Right around here there's a little piece of glass which may or may not show up very well on the video here. Basically that piece of glass, that's your primary lens. Sometimes there'll be a little piece of glass to protect from dust over top the primary lens. All that does is take the light and focus it from here, and it bends the light down so that it comes out over here. Now, this is an important part of the process. There's something missing from this telescope. Right now, this is where your eyepiece normally gets plugged in. See, we can see right through the tube up there. You can see my fingers. This is where the eyepiece is going to be attached. Now, what makes your viewing much more comfortable when you're using a refractor like this is an accessory like this. This is called a diagonal. You can see why. This is the side that attaches to the telescope. There's just a simple flat mirror in there. Insert that and then tighten the pin so it doesn't slide out on you. I've had that happen a few times. It's much easier to look into the telescope this way than simply having to come down here and get on your hands and knees and look up through the tube. Now this is the diagonal. Into the diagonal you're going to insert your eyepiece. And now this telescope is ready to go. A few other key parts of this. This little guy on top, this is a finder scope. It works at very low magnifications. Essentially the idea is that you want to take your object up in the sky somewhere, and it's very small, so it's very hard to find. Find it with the finder scope first, that way you know you're pretty close, and then that way you only have small adjustments to make in order to find it with the main telescope. If you simply ignore the finder scope and try and find your target with the eyepiece only, it's truly like finding a needle in a haystack. On every telescope there's going to be some place, some label with the key information on the telescope. Here, of course, the companies are going to promote their name. The key information is right here. The objective diameter tells us that we have an aperture of 100 millimeters. The focal length is 600 millimeters, and our F ratio, oops, if the camera will focus, our F ratio is f6. All telescopes will have some type of little plate or sticker here with the key information. It's always helpful to look for that information as soon as you examine a telescope. So again, the refractor is just taking the light and focusing it down in. Now let's back up and see the mount that the telescope is on. This is an equatorial mount. What that means is that it spins in two different ways. We have one axis here. If it'll allow me to do this with one hand. I throw this dial. That will allow me to spin the telescope this way lock the dial. There's a second dial here. What that's going to allow me to do, oops, this one's a bit stiff. Whoa! Is it's going to allow the telescope to move in this direction. The reason this is called an equatorial mount telescope is that basically there's a motor on only one of these two axes. Only one of them has to spin in order to keep whatever target you're looking at firmly in the eyepiece. Usually it's this one. So when we're lining this up, we need to, there's a complicated or at least tedious process for aligning the telescope. We're not going to go over that now, but basically just this axis alone is going to point directly up. The shaft needs to point directly up through to the North Star. So that's our refracting telescope. Over here, this is much more simple. This is a reflecting telescope with a Dobsonian mount. Dobsonian is just the main popular type of altitude azimuth mount. So let's take a look here. The main difference between the reflector and the refractor, of course, is the refractor uses lenses. The reflector is simply going to use a mirror. If we look in the aperture here, you can sort of see me and the video camera staring back at you. The light comes in from the heavens, down the tube, bounces off the mirror in the back, and then see this little thing here? This is the secondary mirror. You can see it right there, maybe, I hope. The secondary mirror simply bounces the light off into this tube, and this tube is where we're going to put our eyepiece. For this type of telescope, usually people don't use diagonals because the telescope is basically already built with the diagonal in there. So we'd simply plop our eyepiece in there and be ready to go. Now the only thing that's missing from here so far is our finder scope. Again, finder scopes are fairly small, fairly simple. It's basically a cheap part of a binocular. Just slide it into the grooves. And then tighten it down so it doesn't fall and break. Because if it falls and breaks, they're hard to replace. Again, here is our information, our plate with all the information. This is a SkyQuest Dobsonian reflector, and then it gives us the information here. I'll try and zoom and get it focused. Our diameter, 150 millimeter aperture, focal length 1200 millimeters, and this is an f8. That might not be clear, but that is what it says, is an f8 telescope. So a 6-inch aperture, 6-inch diameter. This is a good reflecting telescope. Very, very appropriate for beginner astronomy. Even has a nice little holder down here for your eyepieces, so you don't have to have a table or something to set them on. Your eyepieces are readily available. Oftentimes, astronomers will have a case to store all of their accessories, all of their extra eyepieces, so that they don't get bumped around and scratched. This is just foam padding and your eyepieces, and there's some filters on here and other things. When you are examining an eyepiece, remember that the telescope itself provides no magnification. All of the magnification, all magnifying power comes from the eyepiece. Specifically, we want to take a look at the focal length of the eyepiece. Come on, you focus. There we go. We have a 25 millimeter focal length on this eyepiece. Sometimes there will be other numbers written on there as well. Get the camera to focus. Doesn't want to focus. This is a 10 millimeter, and it also says Plossl on here. That's just the style of eyepiece. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail about different styles of eyepieces. Ask your local telescope salesperson about those, and I'm sure that they can talk your ear off. So we have the two main types of telescope. We have a refractor on a equatorial mount. We have a reflector on a Dobsonian mount. And then we have our eyepieces and obviously our finder scopes. So this has been a brief introduction to different types of telescopes and just a little bit about how they're used in the parts. I hope this has been helpful. Mr. Stockbridge signing off from Tri-County Community College.